In a world that walks the line, there's a rare few who think outside the box together for the crew. To break the equations, not bound to any rule. Exposing to the world the universe's own view. It takes the talent of the craftsman, it takes the mind of the fool, to make the vision realize energy and matter in a duel. To a break, to a duel.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. So I gotta get used to which button that is. What's going on, guys? It's Saturday, man. We got a cool show going on. Joe, what's going on, brother?
Hey, everybody. Happy Saturday. How's everybody out there today?
Going good, man. We got 2 new members, and I just want to bring it up here. I want to say thank you for Man in the Box and also to Crack. Thank you guys very much for becoming members. Guys, just so you know what we do on the members thing is as I build stuff, I go ahead and show it on there first. You guys get the first look at every project that I do. So it's pretty cool, man. And I leave some behind the scenes stuff on there for videos and stuff so you see them first too. All right, Joe, you ready to talk about this, man? Time dilation?
Yeah, it's right at the center of everything we generally talk about, and I think it needs its own, time slot. So let's do it.
Yeah, right on, man. So one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this today is we're actually building a device for time dilation. That's really its purpose. So what I want to know in the simple concept is it simply going to slow it down, speed it up, or can we change it? And that also, time dilation goes hand in hand with gravity. So will it do that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And, I think that the rotational nature of what you're building really lends itself well to being able to measure that, because as we know, the effects of time dilation works off of a gradient of center, where there's, the warping is more concentrated the closer you get to the effect. So since you're dealing with the mechanism of the dilation in the case of the gravity well device being counter-rotational spin, that spin could actually be remotely measured and monitored, potentially from outside of the time dilation field. There's actually laser devices that, measure RPM, right? So you could actually have a device outside the time dilation field shooting into the time dilation field and then returning, and that might give unusual readings dependent on the distance and the placement of the RPM reader. And I think that would be a way to confirm exactly what's going on.
So if the laser sent at it and it has any of the fields that we think it might, we may not get a return on that laser.
You may not get a return at all. No. Or you might get a faster return. I mean, there could be a lot of it's depending on what the ultimate effect of the gravity well is going to be. Will depend. One thing I would not expect to see in that is an accurate return.
Yeah. So it could be faster or slower than what we actually think.
Yeah.
I want to see if it does light refraction. I want to see if it sends it off in a different direction, maybe, a little bit different angle.
Yeah, I mean, you could be looking at effects similar to like what they showed at Skinwalker Ranch, where they shine the laser up and then there was a dead zone for the light, only for that light to ultimately be emanated out somewhere entirely different that you're just not observing.
That might be interesting, man.
Yeah.
There's a lot to this. So the one thing that we do know is that we have the field. So we're going to capture a static field inside of the cold energy field, if you want to say it that way, with the rod down the center. So we already know that the fields work like that, but what's interesting about it is the cavitation effect that's going to go on. Each layer is going to cavitate, and then the energy itself should be able to fill that spot and create like a capacitor in it. So I'm hoping by the time it gets to the end of it, it should put a pretty thick field on there, thicker than what we're used to seeing.
Yeah, well, with all the interfield torsion that's potentially occurring in that situation, combined with the physical gaps, yeah, I think that would have a really good capacitance potential, and really let you build things maybe in a more defined way than just some of like the coils would, for instance.
Well, the coils would be pretty weak compared to this thing, I would think, right?
I mean, you potentially could be. I mean, then it depends on what you put. I always say it depends on how efficient the coils are and what you're putting in. But yeah,
Yeah, you're right. The geometry coil has so many different stages in it that it would probably have more. You're right. But this thing being that it's rotational should be able to push it with centrifugal force on everything.
yeah, it's sort of like forcing the hand of the effect is sort of by introducing the physical spin, is an amplifier of the overall geometric flow patterns that would take place, within the sphere itself. I mean, again, and I said it the other day, I'm dying to see what it does, that gravity well. Like, I could speculate up and down, but until I see that thing actually going, it's hard to tell. So,
No, I understand that. So, what is one of the main key points here? And let me say this. We're not looking to push the energy out. That's not really what we're looking for. We're looking to pull the energy in. So we have to start with the right field. So normally you'd say, okay, let's put a magnetic field in the center, like a big, ball of iron, and push a magnetic field out, right? I think the key to this is the centrifugal force is going to force everything out. But we need a field to pull everything in. You know what I mean? So if we start out with a field that is essentially pulling the magnetism to the center, and we use diamagnetism in order to do that, then we're going to have it right. So it's going to force it out with, the rotation, and then we'll pull it back in with the correct field. That's what I'm hoping for anyway.
yeah, and there's a long list of diamagnetic materials out there that are just highly effective for that cause. And taking the right material often is just like the key to being able to direct some of the flow force, the flow of the forces, and in the inside or outside of any given system. So its magnetic properties and electromagnetic system is going to make a huge role. So we were talking earlier about bismuth and stuff like that. I think that something like that would be a pretty excellent candidate. Aluminum is not bad either.
I think both of those have their place in this device. Basically, somebody asked real quick, I just want to answer it. What was I making the center sphere out of? And it's going to be brass. And it's because of the way the electricity pulls into the brass. It works a lot better than in copper, where it gets trapped, or in iron, where it sometimes gets trapped. So the brass is kind of different in that way. It'll let it flow out fairly easily. So just out of testing, putting the rod down the center, I tried it out different ways, and that seems to be the best, material for it. But I was going to say on the aluminum, we're looking for the eddy currents to take place in there a little bit. Since it's got magnets in it, there's going to be an eddy current. So and I'll show this to you, Joe. I got 2 more spheres to put out, right? So now you can kind of get to see the little ring around there right here.
Yeah.
So it's not a lot of space, but the cool thing is if you take this part off, you just simply make that out of aluminum. You want bismuth in there, we can do a thin layer of bismuth in there, or, depending on how brittle it is, and I don't know because I don't have any, make this thing out of it. So it could be like a whole different process going on here. We could put an electric in here, anything.
if we didn't do all the back work in theory and all that behind everything that's already come before this experimentally, you know, I would just be so inclined to say like this device is exactly to the T what's been described by people who have described the inner, you know, mechanisms of, you know, UFO type spacecraft.
Hmm.
Like people that have made those reports, and then time and time again, they always say that it's like a gyroscopic globe, you know, spinning globe, um, you know, more or less. And I mean, if we would have had this conversation maybe 6 months ago or 8 months ago, or something like that, you know, when we first got started talking, you know, I think that I probably would have been a little skeptical, a little bit of just about it being a permanent magnet type, you know, structure. But the more time that kind of passed, and just, you know, having a better grasp on the progression of our understanding, you know, makes me really realize, like, I mean, this isn't far. I don't believe that this is far off of, you know, real deal, like ET tech sort of stuff. And I'm not saying ET like alien or anything like that. I'm just saying like what we would generally consider like UFO or ET tech, you know?
Yeah. You know, I also want to make sure I tell you everybody this. I'm not exactly following the original design of this thing, just so everybody knows. So if you're looking for that, that's not what I'm going to do here. I'm going to find out what works together, and then we're going to amplify it. We're already starting out with different energy in the center than what they had. So if you look at Kozel, and I know I put out videos on it and stuff, it's kind of get everybody the idea of what he was looking for. But since we already know what some of the fields are, why not just start with a better knowledge, you know, base and run with that? So that's what I'm going to do. So I just want to make sure we clear up any confusion there. So his test results, whatever they were going to be different than what we're going to come out with altogether.
Now, I think, you know, to maximize the output of something like that, you know, I do think that there would probably have to be a third rotational axis. So if you
Okay.
got one thing spinning this way and one thing spinning that way, you have to have something also spinning, you know, on that third axis.
Mm.
You know, that's just kind of my intuition on it.
Just don't make it easy, do you?
No, I don't, because, you know, again, and that's the trick about gyroscopes, is that you have to have something that's able to make all of these sorts of different directional rotations, you know, without really interfering with the connectivity of what makes it spin and so on. So sometimes, like, you know, like in this, for instance, like if you know, if you could electromagnetically induct the spin, you know, into each sphere independently, but like I can't get my head around how that would work. So then, like, the only other thing that really comes to mind is sort of like I'm a kid of the 90s, so you got to like forgive me for this, but like, you know, they had the old gyro handlebars on bikes back in the day, right? Where you could just indefinitely spin your handlebars around and around and around and still have your brake functionality on both hands, right? So, you know, they achieved that through different pressure rings that just are able to articulate and stuff while still spinning, so there doesn't have to be a wire connection necessarily. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So the same thing could be done potentially through gearing, you know, where you have free spinning hubs within, you know, also hubs that are grabbing at certain points too, that could add a third axis of you know, of directional spin.
So we can add to act like an X, right? So just a hollow round thing go this way and one to go this way to get it to rotate while it's doing this. There's really, honestly, there's no way to do it without detaching the entire thing and making it like a magnetic bearing throughout the whole entire process, and use either high magnetics or high eddy current in order to counter rotate everything. So
Yeah.
that would be one heck of an engineering process to get it there.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, at this stage of and level of ability and development, it would have to be mechanical. And that's not an impossibility, but you'd have to probably build your own gear bearing box.
It'd be more than a bearing box, Joe. Joe, it's you can make the spin this way, and you can make it hollow where it goes around it, right? But in order to get that to turn, you got to break the motor going in and any wires going to it. You see, that's the hard part. Once you do that, then the field has to be born in the center. It has to be an electret that's in the center. In some form or another, you're going to have to do that. So if you made a bismuth sphere, you might be able to pull that off. But you're going to have to make sure that you check everything for the magnetics in it to be able to force something off of it. You know what I mean?
No, I totally understand. Yeah. I mean, okay, so but to achieve that, now that I'm thinking about it, the third axis of movement doesn't necessarily have to be a third sphere, for instance. It could actually just be the two axes of movement then being moved together as well inside of that, creating a third axis, right? So, there's a couple different ways around it, I think. But where my mind is going with that third axis has to do with a caduceus structure and movement. Okay, because you have dual you have two helicals, right, that are doing their own counter rotation, which is also then counter rotating, creating that structure. So, that's the movement of the planets. That's the movement of the DNA. That's that's the root cause. Is caduceus movement. So I don't know. It's just food for thought. Whatever we're going to get out of this is going to be extremely fascinating because it'll be telling as to what's worth pursuing further. I really think that that's sort of it.
We can always attach other axes to the frame itself. So that's not out of the bounds of what we're doing.
Yeah.
It's getting across that motor line. I mean, you got to think about it. We can use one motor to spin two different directions. That's fine. But you're still going to have a motor line, and it has to be pinned to the frame in order for it to counter rotate properly. So those could be outside of that. But even at that, there's going to be after the outer frame after that. You know what I mean? It's a whole, engineering nightmare. Like I said, the only way it would be physically possible is if it acted like a magnetic bearing and literally pushed everything off of it and rotated it naturally based on the actual stuff itself. And then you're going to have to make it float in the middle of the air. I don't.
Well, isn't that the point? So get it to work, then it works.
Well, see, not necessarily. You see, when we look at the sphere itself, so check this out. When I look at it like this, I see it pulls in every single direction, right? And as long as it pulls in, I expect the top and bottom to not have that same pull. And there's a good reason for that, because we're looking for a vortex to come out of the top and a vortex to come out of the bottom. I'm naturally going to create that top one just by putting the Tesla coil up here. Now, that may require me putting another one down below, but I'm okay with doing that, right? But that just takes care of the whole vortex. Now I have this rotating motion. The only one I don't have yet, and it depends on how the vortex comes in the spin, if it can create the field that rotates inside of it, like this, the donut shape, that's the one I'm looking for. Will it naturally create it by turning this with a vortex? Will it pull it through? And I don't know.
I mean, I suppose that, based on our last conversation about the gravity well, I think that it will. Yeah, I mean, I think that it will. I think that it's the strength of whatever you're going to get out of it is going to be as good as the permanent magnets in it. So, in order for it to be effectively scalable into anything significant, would require more along the lines of electromagnetism. So that's something that has to be like explored too once proof of function is there. But like one task at a time. If this is a proof of function, then I think it opens up the door to everything else that needs to be done here. Um, and as we said all along, right? If you get one, you get them all. If you get one at its most efficiency, you have them all. Really, the efficiency is what determines what you get. But when you run at the high levels of efficiency, you're getting them all. How big is that time dilation field going to be, though? Is it going to be confined to very, very like a pinprick in the middle, and quite possibly, as far as like anything even remotely tangible is concerned. But maybe I could be very wrong about that. Maybe that field expands and holds open due to the forced rotation. Like we won't know until that experiment's run.
I could tell you from other experiments that the static field, when it blows out into your room, then the outside, the walls of your room are going to be the field. So it could very well hold it in based on the field we put in the center. I don't know that it will. That's the thing. I just don't know that it will. But it's going to be bigger than what you think it is. It's not going to be just on the size of the spheres. If you got that in your head, it's not going to be that small.
Yeah, and I don't surmise that it would be because of all the other effects that have already been, well documented at this point, like all the saturations and things like that build up. There would definitely be a gradient effect.
Well, think about it this way. We saw my burrito and we described what happened last time, right? You put it in there, you excited the water, the tortilla held it in, and it basically cavitated it. But it made the field push out another 6 to 8 inches.
Right.
And it was more powerful. Yeah, crazy burrito, right? But it should be the same way. That field that's going to come out the end of this thing, it's going to be a monster. And if everything's sealed properly and works properly the way it should, that field should build high capacitance in each level. So that's kind of what I'm expecting of this thing.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely the capacitance element of it, and that means all the rest. So, yeah.
And the question about should we put it in a vacuum? So I think the very last thing I'm going to do is put it in a vacuum. And I don't mean I'm not going to put it in the vacuum. I just mean that that's the last test that I'll do. Number one, I got to get a vacuum big enough for this thing. And you got to encompass the whole frame that goes along with it and everything else. And, we're putting a 2 foot by 2 foot frame in a vacuum doesn't really jive well. So that might be a make your own vacuum scenario. You know what I mean? So, and the original one, when Cosmo did it, he didn't have it in a vacuum. And because we can make a field that'll trap out the air, it may make its own vacuum. And that we want to see before we start pulling a vacuum on it.
Right. So you definitely bear that in mind, is that if one of the anticipated byproducts of this is going to be a form of sustained cavitation, you don't need a vacuum chamber because you've created an isolation zone by virtue of having layers of cavitation occurring. So it would become a moot point as far as needing it to be in a vacuum to get any sort of a different effect. In fact, like the whole entire point of systems like this are to break, or is to somewhat break locality. you know, and the whole entire point of, you know, a vacuum versus an atmosphere, let's say, is the locality. You know, it's the energetic outreach of, you know, any given environment, right? So in this case, it's Earth. Our outreach atmospherically is so far, and then gravitationally is so far, and magnetically is so far, right? And we know that these distances are all relevant, right, and observable. You know, and we've seen that at the smaller scales as well, so we know that that's scalable. So to, you know, believe that it wouldn't be scalable down further than a planetary system, you know, is silly, because we've already seen it in some, you know, to more or less degrees.
I just want to say real quick, I'll answer this question. Could it help if the center core is a magnet but no magnetism? So the energy we're working with pulls the magnetism to the center, and therefore it won't push out on a magnetic field, but it will push out a field from it. It's more like a gas of energy is what's coming out, more natural energy coming out of it. So yeah, it's going to be brass and hollow, by the way. I'm not putting any thick metals in there. I want it to have as much energy to push out as possible without trying to seep into a metal and do that. I also want to
say gas. Like I always, you know, if this helps people out, think of it as a field plume. You know, when something plumes out, you know, it has an expanse and a saturation, right? And it billows. It's sort of like a plume outward. You know, it's a better way to visualize it, because a lot of times, you know, it's like you think gas. It's like, well, gas just goes everywhere, or, you know, when it escapes and whatnot, doesn't really give much of a visual. But a plume is more like it. Think of like a squid shooting ink. You know, underwater, you see it come out, expand, and then diffuse, right? And it's like that, and it's at those deeper points. Now, if that ink, if the squid were to keep on shooting ink into it, because it's just in a perpetual state of creating that environment, you'd notice that the whole area then gets saturated with this plume of ink, right? That's what would occur.
real quick. We got another new member to the show, Joe.
Awesome.
Therese Rosen. I hope I said that right. So thank you for becoming a member.
Thank you for joining.
Yeah, so when you say that, there was a ball experiment. So if you take a ball and it has a rod on it, and you bring it over to water, and then you turn on the drill, it spins, and then around it, it'll build a field of water that just kind of goes around it and around it like this. Really cool experiment, but it's like what we're talking about. It's going to build a field that is in the air, but it's going to hold the water out. And I wish I had that right offhand to show it to you, but it's really already been proven that you can do it. But that's exactly what we're looking to do.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I guess how you describe it, you could describe it either way. Maybe I should start putting up that visual of it so everybody can see it. I'll try to look for that a little later. But yeah, that's kind of what we want to do. We want water formation on the outside a little bit. And I'm not talking, it doesn't have to be water. It could be mist. It could be where we could see it in mist. It could be very simply just anything. When we shine the light on it, changes direction. It could be smoke going on it and hit it and pull the smoke around. Anything that shows it. So I'm hoping it's thick enough, because the problem I had before is the energy field wasn't thick enough, because it didn't have I won't say this, it's not built up in cavitation. So when you run the energy naturally, it'll pull the field, but the field is so thin because you can't amplify the field without flipping the field. So that's kind of one of the things here. We need to be able to amplify it, and it sounds silly like that burrito did, without flipping that field.
Right.
That's what we're looking at in general here. That's what we want, because then I can get it really thick on the outside. Then we can start seeing stuff. That's really what we want.
Right. I mean, well, I mean, that comes down to, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, being able to amplify without flipping the field really comes down to limiting its discharge potential. So as soon as it starts discharging, there's going to be a field flip. We've established that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you limit its ability to disperse and stay in the condensed state, then at that point, you would be able to build it larger and amplify without flipping.
Yeah. Let me show you this, Joe. I found it. So let's take a look at this real quick.
Oh man, that looks like a great lollipop.
Yeah. Just watch what happened. So you see the water on it.
Yep.
Now as he increases it, look.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're looking for. See that gap in there? That's beautiful.
Yep. This is good physics. You see, this is good elementary school physics and how it plays to your advantage. Oh, I love that. That's beautiful.
Now, if I could see that in the lab, man, I'd be so satisfied. I think I'd just retire. So.
Yeah. Well, there's the force field that everybody's always looking for, right?
Yeah.
This has to do with its own rotational energy and the rate of spin, and its relationship to the surface tension of the water, being the intermedium. But but you got to remember something when you're dealing with cavitation, even atmospherically, you're dealing with intermedium as well, because that vacuum that occurs, when, even though it's an atmosphere and to be visually indiscernible from atmosphere, it's still a separate medium because it has a drastically different potential and density.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
it's easier to visualize these things intermedium, like more when it's like standard physics, like air and water. It's just kind of how it goes.
So one way to see it is that alcohol chamber you guys were talking about.
Mm.
So the energy's coming off of this thing may just explode it. But an open air chamber like that might expose it. So if we put the right lighting in there and we create the alcohol in there, then it's not compressed. It's not forced in where it stays in there. So if all we get is like saying you're looking at the desert on a hot day and you see the water vapor coming up and then it spun that vapor, that's what we're looking for.
Yeah, it's forced condensation. So you'd be forcing the condensation of the vapor, whether it's water vapor, alcohol vapor being easier to condense, I would suppose, than water vapor would be, right? So I think that you'd definitely be able to see an effect there. But just, as silly as this is, they're really in, and maybe it could be safely done with the alcohol. Okay, I'm not saying it can't be, but I'm going to say that there's always going to be a high potential, for it to go boom, because now at the same time you're consolidating the volatile vapors and condensing them. And if it's stuck in a field in a constant state of compression, just like anything volatile, if you compress it enough, it's gonna go boom, right? Mm-hmm. So it's just something to bear in mind that's not a green light of safety of being open air. It's just, you won't be dealing necessarily with like a bomb at that point because it's, there's no container, I guess.
Well, here's an interesting thing. A cold chamber, if the outside field puts out heat, then we can use the cold itself to show the field.
Hmm.
So that might be something there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That might work a little bit. Little dry ice in there, something, you know, that would show it. Or we could simply wait for a moist day and heat sand and see if we can get that whole interaction going.
Well, not that this would be like an approved test necessarily or feasible, but you know, I bet you if you really had the thing going and you wanted to see the field interact, you could probably get you know, a noble gas involved, uh, and it would probably condense and illuminate at that point.
Oh, there you go.
You know, it would basically be like a neon bulb without the bulb. What's the difference? Got an energy supply from the you know, from the rotation, and it's being condensed in the same manner in which would be in the bulb. It's just not physically contained. It's contained within fields, right? So that's something that could happen. But then again, you know, like, what are you gonna do? You're gonna pop a fluorescent bulb next to it, hoping that it's gonna take some of it in. You know, like what are you? How are you gonna do it?
Yeah. I'll be honest with you, Joe. I'd love to build a, you know, like a 2 foot by 2 foot box and have a, you know, 1 inch thick plexiglass front and build everything out of 1 inch material and seal it completely. And then run this thing right in the center and then put every gas in the world in there to find out which one does it. And that would be really cool. Because the field alone, I don't want to get it to it's super pressurized, but you know what I mean?
Mhm.
I just want it just enough so we can see something to
So
identify it from the background.
Eighth Center brought up a point that, you know, you could test the field generation with a pendulum, and he brings up a good point. But here's my issue with it, at least, is that you're going to have such environmental interference due to the rotation of it itself, that I think that a pendulum would be sensitive enough in many ways, you know, to pick up on that because it's not a still environment. Right. So, you know, you would get, I think, a response from the pendulum that may be in part exactly the point that he's saying, right? And maybe in part also environmental, but how do you then quantify how much is which? You know, and I think that that's sort of where that one falls flat on its face a little bit. But that, you know, I could be very wrong about that. I mean, if you were just to test it without magnets for a baseline to see what it does, and then test it with magnets as you know, the actual test, and then see what the difference is. I mean, that could be one way of trying to weed through it. But even then, the difference in mass, rotational mass, would have a difference in the forces that are ultimately at, you know, environmentally there. So that factor in itself, you'd have to have dummy, non-magnetic dummy weights to have it be any sort of scientific, right? So you gotta, is the juice worth the squeeze on that one? I'm not sure. Although it's easy enough to test, then might as well.
Well, I see the magnets in this whole thing just like ley lines.
Mhm.
That's what they are. They're lines in there that are going to pull out a heavier magnetic field, so certain things around the Earth operate better in that area, right? But it also may serve to push something else. You know what I mean? When we get down to it, because naturally on one side of it you're creating a negative, the other side you're creating a positive. So depending on which direction we put the last magnets, that may make or break our whole experiment.
Yeah, and you're gonna have to probably test it both ways. So I would probably not be cementing that one in, you know, until you're more certain. Just for people to understand, because I always like to, I think that the big purpose of me being on the show is so you could visualize some of these things, you know, better and understand them better. You know, you have to understand that when you have this counter rotational magnetic, you know, interactive magnetic field structure that's going to take place within this gravity well, what it visually would be like is more like a morphing standing wave. Okay, it's going to be like a standing waveform, more or less with flow, okay, but visually would look standing. I mean, and it would be standing provided that the RPMs remain consistent. Okay, and it's going to be a grid in nature. So, you're going to have a grid like standing wave type pattern, that's going to be created here with it. It's just based on the layout of the magnets and the counter rotational nature of it. Any fluctuation in the RPM is going to make it morph into another type of standing grid pattern.
Yeah,
It's going to be like a standing wave.
Sorry, I'm thinking about it. That it would be great just if we could set up the center with the Tesla coil set in it. That would be amazing. Or all we have to do is build something that's like that. Yeah. So if we build a geometry coil in the center and then we pulse it back and forth, it's like a Tesla coil with like a pump. I mean, creating the vortex going up, then the vortex going down, then going up and coming down, right?
You could make a mini Tesla coil, just the secondary coil, and throw it in resonance with something on the outside so it's picking up on it.
Well, we could see. Oh man, it gets into a whole lot of stuff. So we can initialize the field to start it and then pick up the energy of the whole thing itself and run it back to it.
Good.
If we make it with light enough energy into it, not like super, what I mean? And this thing loves low energy, but it loves the ground. It loves to pick up the energy from the ground. So if we can make it 50% is all we have to, regenerate in it in order to loop it, then I think we're good. That's a hard task though. That one's not easy.
Yeah, that would be a hard task, but the trial and error on that, at least proof of concept, like where you start to see some results and you're like, okay, this is worth pursuing, like I said earlier. But I think that's definitely a feasibility here. I think that if you're able to induct the energy into it, it opens up new horizons as far as everything we discussed earlier, which would be like the axes, how it's actually spinning, and the method of power and everything like that. It could be as simple as having a high capacitance potential in the geometry, right? And then having in resonance the induction of the energy into the coils that ultimately make the fields that grow over time. So it'd be one of these things where like you threw it on and nothing would happen, and then slowly and slowly and slowly, and then next thing you know, once it reaches like a certain point, it kind of powers up. Once it powers up, now it's kind of kicked into high gear, and it'll start building quick, fast.
Yeah, Dennis mentioned a tuned receiver inside would be a great idea.
Yeah.
Once we have, see, the whole thing is we got to run it, find the speeds, find all the tuning, and then we can make it harmonically balanced. Because I don't think we're going to be able to do it before that. And then put a receiver in there to the harmonics and make sure that it's set where the receiver can pick up all three levels of that harmonic.
Yeah.
So that, 1, 2, 3, it all pulls together. And that's where like a Don Smith coil would come in. It's 3 separate ones going to the same main harmonic. That would be amazing to put in there. It would amplify the power. Yeah, there's a whole thing to that. And then since we already learned how to convert the power from this to regular power, you know what I mean? We pretty much kind of have where we need to go with it.
But that goes right back to what we were asking earlier. It would amplify the power without flipping the field.
Ooh, it might, yeah.
Yeah. So, if it's in tune, And that's the whole thing about this or any system is in tune, right? Like if you're talking about a world of ideals, tolerances, and this and that, you know, everything should be in tune. You know, everything should just be, it should be like capable of spinning and going at the same exact rates in proportion to everything else around it, you know, in octaves. That's realistically how you would have this thing be as efficient as humanly possible and balanced. You know, it's taking all like the old school talents into account. You know, you're looking at like a tire balancing, you know, and like brass instrument tuning and like things of that nature all coming, you know, together into one device, you know, that would be able to then everything you've been doing with you know, resonance and coils, and it would all have to work in tune with each other to get the most out of it, the most.
So let me ask you this. I've been kind of curious since we looked at it. Should the fields all be cold, though? Should there be a field flip in between them? That's the hard part when you look at it. Like, should there be a hot, you know, like cold, hot, all the way out in order to build this thing right? And I'm not talking like major degrees here. This is not like a magnetic coil by any means. This is like barely tipping the scale between the two.
I mean, just for an off the cuff response, the Earth does, right? That's how the crust of the Earth, you know, not the crust, but the layers of the Earth ultimately work. Is you have these different layers of densities, right? Each layer of density is kind of, you know, a different temperature, right? It's a different kind of energy and different kind of temperature. And like anything, when looking for an equilibrium, if you run something all cold, well, you know, then you need something to counterbalance that too. So what you're saying makes total sense in that regard.
So another thing was like a peg cell in between the things. It may not seem like a lot now, but once it starts, you know, splitting fields and stuff, and it pulls in the energy, it may pull in a higher amount altogether just by itself.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that makes total sense. I mean, considering that a peg cell in itself has that ability to bring in the, you know, both sides of the energy, act as a barrier and almost like a state of neutrality, neutral energy. You know, at that point, I think that's fascinating. I mean, it becomes hard. It's like how do you implement all these things? You know, the engineering of it is always fascinating. But where there's a will, there's always a way.
I personally think a lot of it's going to be, let's just run the magnets, see what it does. Then let's start adding to it. Let's turn on the energy from the Tesla coil. Let's see what it does in relation to the magnets. Then we could start adding things. So do we take this outside sphere here and we just put aluminum tape on it? What effect does that have? That way it's like tin foil, but it's, you know, glued to the surface. Then do we start exotic materials? Do we put peg cells in there? Do we fill it up? Do we put like a little hole in there and then fill it up and cap it? You know what I mean? That could be something that's also done, because as I understand, the peg cell is pretty much a creamy stuff that you push in there and then seal it and it dries, right? And that should be fairly easy to do in this type of process, because we already built the like I said here, we already built enough in here to be able to put something in there. Again, real thin, but we can always add to that. Here's the thing. Just because I put it this tight doesn't mean it needs to be that way. We could just build another one of these, push it out, you know, double the length, and just add, just like these are, the little knobs here, we could just add double that.
I mean, just bear in mind too that I mean, in my opinion, and I guess experimentally, we'll see shortly. But I think that the proportions of those spheres to one another are is hypercritical. You know, uh, so any change like that you're probably going to make, you're probably going to want to keep it in the ratio that that works really. And like we know from Bendel's work, right, the sphere ratios that generally work with rotational forces, counter rotational forces, is that what is it, 1-2-4 deal, right? So it would be like 1-2-4-8, or you know it, anything analogous to that.
Yeah, I like I said, I think this whole first one is going to be, throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. And then we build the second one based on the first one and the testing that was done. I think that's fair.
It's got to happen that way. How else?
Yeah.
How else, really? Like, if it turns out to be a toy, which it won't, by the way, just the feel, it's not a toy, but like if it turns out to be, can't say I didn't try, and I'll try something completely different, as far as the proportions or whatever goes. Like, you need to be able to track down and troubleshoot based off of the experiments. Obviously, that's what it boils down to. But in theory, it's all there, man, and I have great high hopes for this. And I know that our excitement for what you're doing right now kind of took us away from the idea that everything we're discussing right now is to do with the topic of the show today being time dilation, right? Mm-hmm. Like, the whole point is that if you're able to create artificial gravity and you're able to therefore create a time dilation field as a result, and you're able to identify this in some kind of measurable and meaningful way, that means you got it, period. Right? And what did you get? It all, right? At that point, you got it all, because we know that there is a relationship between gravity and time, and we understand that there's a relationship between electromagnetism and gravity, and therefore time. Mm-hmm. So it becomes really interesting, and at super high efficiencies, realistically, it could have to do with something we've discussed at great length, being the Planck scale. Once you get something working at super high efficiency, it's possible that the internal workings of this are working at the cusp of Planck scale, meaning that there could be very, very weird and significant outcomes of that sort of testing, right? Like, if the thing were to just like disappear. It's like plain and simple, disappear, right?
Yeah. Well, it'd be interesting if it was disappearing into like a multiverse scenario, or if your body becomes like ghostly, and that would be so weird. But it's a possibility. They haven't defined it in science yet, so they have.
No, they kind of have to find it in science, though, because anything that exists outside of Planck's distance exists outside of time and space.
Yeah, well,
so you might end up, if in the context of if you were in the center of this, experiencing that, right? Well, what do you experience? You could potentially be in a situation where you're seeing the past, present, and future simultaneously.
Joe, it comes to mind we may want to put a camera outside as a security camera and just check the time and put a clock out there just in case something weird happens.
You need to have, when running this type of testing, the only way to make it objective is you need to be able to have, some way to quantify it and show it. And that becomes difficult because of the field gradients. And, one thing that nobody here can answer, and we won't even waste time speculating, is what leads to a wave function collapse. So, observing an area from here or there or outside may yield the same result, even though it has effect. Like, relativity gets screwy that way. when you're dealing with wave function collapse. So does something from outside the time dilation field appear to be moving faster or slower if something outside is recording it and observing it? Like, or does it just not, by virtue of the observation, create some type of entanglement situation where there would be no observable effect, even though there's an objective effect? And then what does that objective effect mean? Like, this is what I'm saying. This is where it becomes very difficult, because everything being relative, the experienced time of, like, let's say a camera recording within a time dilation field would see no quantifiable difference necessarily from a camera rolling the exact same amount of time outside one, possibly except for how long the camera ran. And that's where it gets interesting.
Oh, it's like that movie with that big device, and it dropped, and just the time changed. Interesting.
Yeah. So it's really hard to say how you could capture that or what it would look like from outside because of wave function.
Yeah. From my experience in running some of these experiments and having a heavy static field in your room, and then it being held in by the room in a natural way, right? Then you turn around and you're building fields in segments in that, and I've done it all. There is a very, very high amount of energy in your room that doesn't necessarily blow out all your computers and everything. So because it's holding in certain parts of that field, it's like two ships in the night, man. They just pass each other. They're not interacting with some parts of your room. And I don't know the best way to say that, because it's really, from other people's experience as well, they felt the same thing. And there is a small time dilation, and there's no real good way to prove it. And it could be as simple as you're standing in the room and it feels like 20 minutes for a test, and that's usually what's on your clock. But when you walk out, it's 3 hours later. And it could just be your mind tripping on you, and that's 100% could be what it is. It could be all the energies, messing with you. It could be something more. And that's kind of one of the reasons we started this experiment, is when you start to notice that stuff in the lab and things start going on, then you start to go, okay, now we need to pursue this further, because we found an anomaly. And I love tracking down anomalies.
Well, you gotta, like, these things, even though they're subjective because it's like self-reported or self-experienced, right? That's what relativity is generally, right? So what's interesting is, think about yourself day at the beach, right? Day at the beach goes by like that, but if you put yourself into a dark windowless room, 10 minutes feels like an hour. So what effect of time dilation actually do we experience on a day-to-day basis that we feel is subjective, but is really actually objective? Because the mind, I firmly believe, is 100% a time dilation mechanism in itself, and there's reasons that high degrees of meditation and being able to zone out, and like, there's reasons, that I'm saying that, right? But environmentally, whenever you're outside, blue sky over your head, with the sun shining down on you, those days go fast. You're in a room, dark room, no windows, no clocks, no way to gauge, no way to measure, right? It drags. And it drags because, you're not even in the same exact environment that would otherwise be affecting you. And your time dilation, because we don't have a way to significantly measure it, because it's happening in the brain because of the external circumstances, right? The clock on the wall doesn't give a shit if the sun's out or not, right? But but your brain may very well be receptive to these things, and there could be like a more objective um, result of these sorts of things, like aging, for instance. How come some people seem to age faster than others? Oh, well, it's an environmental circumstance. Well, okay, is it because their brain is, for whatever reason, and it could be a variety, in some sort of um, accelerated time dilation state? It could well be. And if the brain is working the nervous system, and the nervous system is part of that gradient, well, your whole body could age along with it. That's why some people look like crap and other people look young, possibly. you know like there's just different ways to think about it, I guess. A little off the cuff and a little out there, I guess, but like, again, meditation, I think, is sort of, I a high degree of proof of that. People's subjective experiences seem to overlap an awful lot.
So hold on. There is a science aspect to that too. The energy we're working with directly with water and crystal make contact. It directly affects in the crystal the energy that we're using, and it amplifies that energy of that crystal. So it amplifies the frequency and everything else. So if you said that we have crystalline structure in our brain, then that would completely be understandable because we have the fluid in there already, right? So this kind of energy penetrates you, you're gonna feel it. So it could very well be something, that's going on with you personally in this situation. So that was, by the way, for anybody new watching, that was the interesting thing about this energy is it's not like hot electricity. We call it cold electricity. It's just simply below room temperature, and it's an inversion of the field. So the magnetic field goes inside and instead of outside. So you don't get Lenz's law with this. So I forget the name it was actually called, if you remember, Joe. Anyway, why I'm saying that is so that everybody understands this energy will work with water, and it'll also work with quartz. And we've proven that. I made a big pond in the backyard. I put the energy right into it and then lit up lights everywhere around that pond. And it's 10 foot by 10 foot, 2 inches thick of water. That's about it. And it pushed right through everything. So it's interesting to see how this stuff would work around you inside the field as you're standing in it. And being that I worked with it last time, it might have had, something like that go on. It might be placebo. I don't know.
Well, what was it in the chat? It looks like Spirit, aka Rabbit, was saying that it's all connected, which I absolutely agree. It's my own experience with it. But also that certain things like Emerald, could potentially kind of hone in on that. I mean, we've discussed that at length a bunch of times. I think that it's worth touching on just real quick again anyway. I'm a firm believer that there's something more to corundum type gens like Sapphire and Ruby, okay, than we fully understand. That's my personal opinion on it. I mean, lab grade sapphires and rubies are readily used in lasers, for instance, to achieve photon coherence. And it's that coherence that allows for the greater effect to occur. You have to cut out the noise of the overall, whether it's white noise, white light. It's the culmination of multi-frequency emissions. It's that noise that causes issues. It's why coils and systems like this that are out of resonance don't work properly, is because there's too many interfering frequency patterns that occur. So achieving coherence and resonance is the key to all of that. Quartz is excellent at being able to direct energy and create energy through pressure and piezoelectrics, right, through its crystal structure. Sapphire and ruby is a 6-sided crystal structure that's alternating triangles, and it again has significant laboratory uses for being able to get different wave functions to be coherent. So I think that that's something critical, and it's something that makes it so much easier to be able to have things that are in tune and resonance with what your output is when it's consistent at one number. And that's what it boils down to. That's how high efficiency is achieved, by the more alternative frequencies that you could weed out and nail on one frequency at all layers. You're gonna start going big at that point. It's all about coherence.
Well, so hold on. If we didn't want the same frequency, say we just wanted an octave scale between multiple ones. So we want A, we want B, we want C, but we want them at the highest octave we can possibly get. Wouldn't that be kind of what we're looking for, instead of the like A, and just different numbers of it?
Well, as you know, from, let's take that approach of music scale, okay? We know that certain combinations of tones are dissonant. Okay. So not all notes, so to speak, within the octave are necessarily working cohesively with the others all the time. Right. So you need to be able to make chords. And that's similar to like harmony. That's like the analogous that we can understand in a way that we could easily relate to, and so yeah, having layers throughout the octave makes sense, but having each and every note, their pairings and what they're next to and the sequence in which they occur is significant, just like anything else, because you're gonna have dissonance in the
Well,
in the
it could,
equation.
the way I look at it, could just be like taking a guitar and strumming it once. Every chord has a different frequency in it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay.
And if they're in tune, then it should make a beautiful note in the, or notes,
Yeah,
I
no,
should say.
that's fair.
One thing I was going to ask, so, and this is just kind of off the subject a little bit. I mean, everybody talks about electrons. I'm not so sure, and this is just my opinion, that electrons aren't the impedance of hot energy. They're the reason that we have hot energy. So when you remove the electrons, it goes to cold energy, and it no longer has hysteresis in it. That's just my personal opinion, but I think that's what they were trying to come to with Tesla. So again, it could be wrong, just my opinion, but I think they show up in hot energy where I don't think that they're going to show up in cold energy in the same way. Now, it could show up as an inversion of that, and I'm 100% okay with that. But I always wondered about that when it comes down to it, because it could just be an effect of the hot energy. And say the simple effect was the magnetism level, that it was forcing things and it would cause things to cog when they get two magnets together. That could just be an electron effect. And it could just be moving the electron and where the field is. That could be as well. So kind of an interesting topic unto itself, but I just thought I'd throw it out there.
When you have wave function interference that occurs in a proper state where you're getting both sides, manifest at the same time, hot and cold, it's basically like centerline cancellation. So if you have like a higher amplitude waveform, right, and then you have something that's 180 degrees at a phase, but of a lesser amplitude running at the same zero, right? You have a top and a bottom of your waveform that remains out of your potential that collapses, right? And that gives you two sides to a coin.
Mm-hmm.
And really it's just a mirrored image of itself. You know, if you want to think about it that way.
It's funny you bring up mirrored images. I love mirrored images. So the mirror flips it, just like in your camera. It looks opposite of the way it should be, unless your camera flips it for you automatically. So in that, it's interesting to look in the mirror and see something because you're going to see it 180 degrees out of phase. And as soon as you set it down there, it makes the image in, you know, not, I wouldn't, how do I say? You would say reverse, right? But it would look like it flipped it. And basically 180 degrees is what it goes.
So here's what's interesting about this. Now, I'm going to tie something together with what I just said. So when we were talking off air the other day, and I said with your gravity well, so when you're connecting the two halves of the spheres together, right? Take a membrane, you know, a rubber membrane under tension, right? Said snap your two pieces together and then adhere it so it stays in place, and then seal it up, right? And I said that. I said when you spin it, right? Even if you're just talking one layer, we don't need to build out the layers at this point. Just the one, call it center core, right? You spin this thing. Now, what happens to the membrane inside, right? Directional spin is going to move the center of gravity out toward the sides, right? Through centrifugal force. And then it's going to concentrate at a point of equilibrium. And it's going to create like a push out on the membrane on one side. And it's going to be opposite on the other. So you'd have one this way, one that way, right? Except chasing its tail, right? So it would be spinning and it would be chasing its tail, this thing. And basically make like a weird S shape, right? Like that. Yeah. Like that. So that's the mirrored image right there. Okay. that is the mirrored image. It's the same mirrored image I'm talking about. If you were to eliminate the center of it, they're both traveling the same direction, but they're opposite each other.
Okay. I have an experiment for you, Joe, and tell me what you think about this.
Sure.
What if we made honeycombs, just 3D print the honeycomb, but in a sphere, but then we put the balloon over top of it and stretched it, and then we put another honeycomb over top of that. So it would basically be the membrane in the center of it, and then we put a speaker in the center. You know, those little tiny speakers? We could always, you know, those ones. And then we spun that sucker. Do you think it would reverberate?
So hold on. So a sphere out of honeycomb with a speaker in the center. The honeycomb is open to the center and the outside, right? Speaker in the center, and then a complete membrane around the outside.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that in itself just, well, okay, so here's the issue with that. Is because of the directional propagation of the sound wave. So, you know, you would have directional, so there would be an imbalance right off the bat that would have to be overcome. Could be overcome by
a resonating chamber. Put it in a resonating chamber.
Yeah, a resonating chamber with multiple outputs on the.
Because it just could be a speaker in the center.
You'd have to have a shell in the inside. It would have to be a speaker and a shell, and then, you know, then basically a sphere that lets out spirally. Well, there would have to be a way. I don't know. Like I don't. So like I'm trying to get my head around that.
So every honeycomb would have a hole to it, and the hole would push out the sound to that center of that honeycomb. So you get the most vibration you could out of it, right? So when we put it's like putting a condom on this, right? We make it a sphere, put a condom on it, and then basically we stick another sphere on the outside of it. Right?
Okay, hold tight.
So now we can get the vibration.
Rather than a speaker, how about just a piece of like quartz that's screaming? You know,
Yeah, we
like,
can.
just something like that.
Anything you want that makes
That way,
sound.
because the way that a speaker works is it's creating the pressure waves, you know, in and out, and it would just be it would be directional. But if you had something that was just simply resonating and held in place, then at that point it would create the sound, but you know, without necessarily the directional propagation, because it's more of a vibrational output than a propagated output.
I'm just looking at putting frequency in the center. So anything that creates a frequency that will allow it to push the air inside of it to create the vibration, and it is, I guess, what we're looking for in that.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to think of it on how you would cat it out to make the thing work.
I mean, I think that the idea of an external membrane, it's just different than an internal one. You know, it's different than an internal one. You know, because an internal one has like, I don't know. Maybe I need to get my head around that one a little bit more.
Well,
Like,
because then every time that you make that membrane vibrate, any water that would be on the outside of that would pull out the frequency in itself. So if you put a speaker under a little cake pan, say a little round one like this, and put it under there, it puts the exact frequency pattern out in it. So it doesn't just go in little waves. It'll push the exact pattern correctly through it.
Mm.
That's interesting because now we understand why the membrane's being used in that way.
yeah,
You know what I mean? Now it makes more sense than the honeycomb. And then, by the way, the honeycomb, if you look at it, okay, and it's just my opinion, you're creating static electricity between two membrane fields in a honeycomb, which then propagates the energy properly. So it's like a dielectric field in between each one. So then they resonate together and it creates more energy. So it could just be the energy center of the hive.
could be.
So, and from what I understand about bees, don't they put there's a baby growing inside that energy center right there, and then so there's so many different things that it could be, but it'd be interesting to nail that down once and for all, because when you get into some of these people, and what's his name?
Gorbanikov.
Venikov. That's what he deals with. And he always talks about the energy, the vibration, the heat, things like that. That would be very interesting to find out if that was the case in all of this, just as a side experiment to what we're doing with this other one.
Yeah, that's true. And there's a lot of different directions that type of experimentation could take too. You know, maybe like a simple answer to that is you know, and it's just like everything else. You were to layer honeycomb patterns with a membrane separated by a resonating plate. Like I think Brandon said a couple of minutes ago, you know, like there's quartz plates that are used in like microphones, for instance. You just had something that's the size of whatever you're building, and you just layered it between quartz plates, membranes, and honeycombs, that you'd be creating, you know, multiple rotational resonance chambers that are occurring at the same time. And there's no doubt in my mind that there'd be a great deal of amplification that would occur of the you know, initial resonant inputs, just based on those structures and how it entraps the waveforms and acts as a capacitor of them as well. So storage and amplification.
Let me throw this out to you. Do you remember? Oh man, something a phone. I don't remember the full name of it. I'm sure everybody else does. You put the needle on it, and it has this big tube that comes out, right? And it has different angles on it as it comes out. It's an old time thing. You used to run wax wheels on it, and it used to have songs on it.
Right. The Edison thing.
Yeah. So
a phonograph.
There you go. What if we just looked at that tube and split it every inch or so and put a membrane on that and make sure it looked like a honeycomb structure? The point is, is we build it like a cone shape outward so that it would propagate the energy to a bigger, bigger, and bigger, bigger. So if you put a piezo buzzer and you hit that piezo buzzer with a frequency, it would go boom, 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 boom. You know what I mean? Throughout each one of them, would it create a thrust? I wonder if that's possible because
Right. This is all like more mechanical proof of concept of just the hires of what we're doing. It's all analogous. Like let's be honest here. Like and I say it all the time. What we're talking about here is what we're talking about there. It all works the same. It's just like you need to be able to extrapolate like the concepts of something like that, for instance, and be able to apply it to this. The same physics works.
Mhm.
So I mean, if it I can't say that I 1,000%. I get what you're saying, but I can't say that I 1,000% follow that. But yeah, I mean, it follows the same train of thought. So why wouldn't it, right?
Getting back to the time dilation, one of the reasons why you would want to create this, by the way, is to create that outer field. We literally, if we want to make a UFO that goes up into space and does it the right way, we have to create the thick outer field. In order to do that, we're going to have to pull off this kind of an energy thing. So that's kind of why you want to do it. You want to create a thick outer field. You want to be able to separate yourself from the actual gravity that you're in. That's the goal. Now, all the other effects that's going to come with it is a bonus. But that's the main thing. We want to create that field and separate ourselves from the gravity we're in. Then we could do whatever we want. And you can add in thrusters that you want, anything. That's you know what I mean? The whole thing is, though, can we get it thick enough? And then in the end, will it produce O3 on the outside? You see, most people would say that's a bad thing. I'm going to tell you that's a perfect thing that we want.
No, you want ionization on the outside because you want your jump from cold to hot electricity to kind of interacting with the external environment to occur at that outer level. That is the plasma generation. That is therefore, by virtue of the spark gap plasma generation, that's also the O3 output. So you're dead on with that one, I'd have to say. One thing, I kind of forgot where I was going with that, but it was kind of important.
Well, one of the other reasons, I'll just say this real quick.
Yeah.
You want O3 is because if you get into space, now you have a bubble in space that's not unlike the planet itself. So now you have an atmosphere building in there. Now you can be able to convert to oxygen. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that you can breathe it. That's mind-blowing in how that works.
That's a good point too. Okay, so that actually reminded me of what I had lost. So there was things that we touched on. I think it was the other day that I mean I don't think really thrusters are really where it's at, because if you have the electromagnetic forces on the outside, really it just comes to polar vectoring. Being able to have it chase itself. That would act as the mode of motion.
So change where the positive part in the field is, so that I can see that.
Yeah, and when you have something that's a disc or a sphere or it could be any shape, really, when you're able to direct a north pole somewhere, you'd have that instant attraction, within the field, and as long as it remains directly right outside the cold field, it would be perpetually attracted to it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's sort of how you'd be able to work that out. So you wouldn't even have to worry about thrusting anything. Realistically, you just worry about, being able to project the pole.
Well, then that asks the question, when it works the same in space. It's a lesser density than the atmosphere here on Earth, but I guess you have to ask yourself, is there energy in space? I particularly think there is. So I think there's a huge energy field around the entire the Milky Way galaxy, I think there's energy all around that. And until we get out of that field, we wouldn't know what it felt like. And I don't think we're getting out of that anytime soon. So I'm going to say there's energy out there, and we're just basically slapping it on one side and riding it in. That's about what we're doing.
So, I mean, the way that I see it is that, I mean, you know, there's always going to be energy available because of just ether and how ether works. You know, it may seem like nothing, but until you're there, right? Because when you're there, you're now mass in, you know, ether that's then a disturbed potential. So you'll always act as a manifestation of potential energy. You know, kind of just the way. Like if you weren't there, it might not be detectable because it's at rest, right? But once you're introduced into that into that environment, all of a sudden that potential becomes available because you're matter within a field of potential, and then you know, the electromagnetic potentials and stuff would be manifest at that point. So
also, if your energy is hot on the outside, you're not flipping any field by going into the gravity of a planet and swinging around it. You know what I mean? Or going to the sun and picking up energy there. I mean, it's kind of the same thing, isn't it? You're just adding energy to the whole system because it's going to break down to the inside. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, right. Once you disturb the still, that's what happens. You know, and we're all disturbances in the still. So everything that, like, even like, I mean, take it a little woo. Your soul is a disturbance in the still. Like everything is. You know, any waveform is.
Gotcha. Sorry, I was reading the comment. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. So I guess it would come down to once you have that, I guess one of the questions would be, is the ether something that you open? Or is it basically all the fields that combine together in the center to create it?
I mean, man, that's way too. That's something we've touched on many a time, and I mean, I hate to naysay it, but this is way too deep of a conversation for this episode. I mean, you know, it's my opinion, in brief, that ether is fabric. It's prima materia, and the fabric of our dimensional reality. You know, and it is the outward mechanism of why we experience time. All right, and why space has any sort of different. It's the fabric of everything that's made, and the fabric of the barrier that lies beyond. Okay, so when you open up to that, it just basically means that you're able to, you know, channel the potential into your system, you know, and utilize the prima materia that's always there and always available. Okay, and the only way that you can really do it is by gapping the organized structure that already is. Okay, so we're in an atmosphere. Okay, the atmosphere is you know, it's oxygen, it's nitrogen, it's carbon dioxide, you know, it's whatever vape smoke I puff into the air, it's, you know, the fart that from the Taco Bell last night, it's all that stuff, right? And all that stuff is an organized and extrapolated form of ether in itself. Okay, but it's omnipresent for the most part. In order to get to the pure potential, you need to be able to create a void, right? In order to take in from that pure potential, because everything else is already materialized in our reality.
So what?
When you bring it out of the atmosphere, it becomes the same thing but a little bit different. Okay, because once you don't have all this matter, now you're just dealing with a pure potential energy fabric. And if it's in a state of rest, there's no space dust, there's no the gases, you know, and it's light void and all this stuff, right? At that point, the presence of you experiencing this is enough to activate an etheric reaction because of electromagnetism. Okay, because that's how energy works. When you disturb a still and potential, it collapses into electromagnetism, which then interacts with matter, and really only in the presence of matter and waveform, which is probably by definition observation.
So let me just throw this out there. It's everything and it's nothing.
We've said that 1,000 times, and it's everything and nothing simultaneously. Absolutely.
It's the breakdown of every bit of matter and energy into pure energy, not in any way, shape, or formed in any type. And then it reassembles itself as it goes out. So it destroys itself coming in and breaks it all apart, and then it reassembles and heads out. So it would feel like it's the null zone, but it's not. It's the ripping apart of the energy and all of the electrons pulled apart from whatever atom it was in, and then the reassembling on the way out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in order for, okay, it's probably easier to understand, like those early manifestations of etheric energy by virtue of understanding the other side of the coin, which is much more easy for us to experience in our daily lives, which is matter. Okay. So, I mean, what is matter? I mean, matter is highly condensed energy that's entrapped. Okay. It's entrapped energy is really realistically what it is. And, it's entrapped by different attractions that occur during high density and resonant states. That's what matter ultimately is, right? Well, for instance, you burn a piece of wood and you're releasing its energy, right? Hot energy. You're releasing it. You're creating chemical reactions, breaking it down into simpler forms. You're creating hydrocarbons and things of that nature, which are a simpler form of matter, which is also a more complicated form of energy. Okay, but closer to a source, right? You break the hydrocarbon bonds, you have hydrogen, you light hydrogen up, or you make plasma out of hydrogen rather, right? And then it could actually be released to a pure energy state without it combusting, because that's sort of how it works. So when you're dealing with matter, you're dealing with an entrapment of energy, high density energy. All right. Now, on the other side of the coin, you have etheric energy and electromagnetism and the manifestation of energy in an untrapped state. All right. And energy always wants to return to a still. That's why entropy exists. All right. And energy always wants to be able to take matter with it. Energy's whole goal and why it manifests in electromagnetic properties in general is to be able to break down matter, bring it back as energy, and return to a still state. Everything wants to return to an etheric state by nature and virtue of itself. It's like in a planetary context where we have equilibrium and orders of symbiosis, that high diversities of different types of matter and organics and life and such could exist, because we are literally in an entrapped state of high density energy.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's so when you understand how that all comes to be, it's easy to understand too how the other side of the coin works. It just works it's the higher levels of the process. It's what happens when the hydrogen becomes plasma and bridges the gap between matter and energy in a return to a still state. Right?
Okay.
Kind of it. Because if the plasma then disperses into a diffuse state, it could then become a simpler form of itself, right? It could then become in a static state, and that static state could become a diffuse. It's not that it's ever destroyed; it just becomes diffuse. And then once the energy comes back to almost enough of a diffuse state, it ultimately becomes some form of rest. And I'm not saying complete still, but some form of rest.
Mm-hmm.
Until it's then interacting with matter again, and then it wants to drag more matter back into the ether again.
So I kind of see it like this. If we're using the Russell scale, right, it's going to go in one side and come out the other. And it's just a vortex. It simply breaks it down. And depending on where it goes, now there could be an inner and an outer vortex in the same side. And you got to realize that, because at different levels of the planet, if you took our DNA and put it in that vortex, we would come out different at every level on that planet. We would not be the same as what we look at right now. That's an interesting thing to see. So another way to see it is black holes and white holes. If black holes suck it in, the white holes push it out. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. If you look at that in the actual size of it, where are they at? Where's the tunneling happen, and where is that pump working? And is it creating new universes on the white hole side? Is it destroying universes on the black hole side, or solar systems, if you will? It'd be interesting to look at to see if that was the case or not, or if they're just phenomena that happen, because it's got to go somewhere. It ain't going to stay there. Is it something trying to form that pulls everything to it, doesn't have an outer shell to contain it yet? Like if we said Saturn could just simply be it's missing its outer shell, so the gravity's off the charts. But if you put that outer shell like we have on ours with our ozone layer, would it contain it and reduce the amount of gravity to it?
Well, I mean, if you were to put an O3 layer on top of all that hydrogen and methane, you'd end up with a pure water world at that point, and everything that comes along with it as a more because right now, with the seas of hydrogen and methane that exist on a planet like Saturn, you're dealing with high energy potentials in a state of quasi entrapment. Like it's ready to go back to pure energy at almost any given time, and simultaneously it's also ready to collapse into a more entrapped state at any given time too, but it's reached a state of equilibrium as it is currently. There's really little, I think a negligible amount of oxygen, for there to be any sort of, combustion, and there's no fusion obviously taking place, or else it would be a star.
Mm-hmm.
So if it were to enter into a state of fission, then at that point it would, it'd be catastrophic, I suppose. But it would probably blow apart into more complex forms of matter. But if it were to go into a state of fusion, maybe through if it were in a state of like high density compression, or something like that, it could potentially burn into another star. And it's something that we've touched on before. And that's why I even summated. I was like, well, when you're dealing with a planet that has a high degree of hydrogen depletion, that's free hydrogen in, as pretty much its main constituent, chances are that if there were any carbon that were to exist from that, you'd be looking at carbon in its most compressed form, in its most dense form, being like diamond or something similar. So you could be looking at like a diamond core planet of hydrogen because of all of the material depletion that just left carbon and hydrogen realistically, and just compressed the carbon into a super solid crystal state.
Yeah. I think the only difference between the gas planet and the sun is that its reaches resonance peak. That the sun itself the core is fully resonant, and it's not off by any amount. The frequencies between each level are the highest octave possible. So I don't know that it's they always say that the gas and stuff on it sets on fire. I mean, after a while, I don't know about you, but as soon as I hit a match to any of that stuff, it explodes all together at once. It doesn't go in stages.
Because
So
it's not a burn, it's a fusion process.
yeah,
And honestly, who's to say that the center of the sun is engulfed in a fusion process? You know, the compression of the center of the sun could very well be the manifest of the fusion process at the more surface levels, where the diffuse amount of hydrogen is less dense. Because like any sort of like any sort of gas or anything like that, where it's least diffuse, is most likely to react, right? So it could very well be, I don't want to say straight up at the surface, but like it could be a very surface level type of fusion that's going on with the sun, and the sun's in a state of collapsing and expansion constantly. That's keeping the fusion process going. So it's hard for me to say. It's not a combustion event. The sun. We experience it as hot because of the radiation that's off put from the fusion through of the hydrogen.
well, that's kind of the thing, though, isn't it? If you take something at high frequency, it's hot to touch, but it's not necessarily hot. You know what I mean? So the core could be very cold, and this thing could be just blazing on the outside.
Right. I mean, I'm not saying yes or no on that, but that's kind of what I'm saying is that right. You could be dealing with very, very high density types of gas, in the center of it that's not fusing at all, and it's the outward expansion and contraction that's occurring and setting it off, and it's not a burn, it's a fuse. That's the emission of light and heat and radiation is from the fusion event. It's not a boom.
Yeah, by the way, I think light travels faster than what people think it does, in the fact that you don't see it unless it comes in contact with some sort of magnetic field. And from running experiments with high voltage, you don't see it until you get the magnetism high enough in any part of it in order to see it. And
right,
it might be a different field altogether. It could be just a different waveform. It could be that they're dealing with, instead of transverse, they could be all deal with longitudinal waves out there. You know what I mean? Or scalar. And until it comes into contact with that, light doesn't appear.
Well, and that's the thing that, I mean, I think that was one of the things that sent me down these rabbit holes was I like had a thought experiment with myself one time just based on like common knowledge stuff. And it was so many years ago at this point. But I realized something is that I'm standing in a room that's well lit, and the room is realistically pitch dark. Like I'm not in a room full of light. I'm in a room that's lit, and there's a difference because the light is only manifest once it's reflected or refracted, and then until that happens, it's nothing. You see right through it, and it's no different than if you were to be sitting there looking into a dark woods or something like that, and somebody were to shine a laser or a flashlight or something between you and the dark woods from the other direction, provided that there's no floating shit in the air and whatever have you, like you're never going to know that they're shining that flashlight directly across your path of view. It's not going to make your vision any better because of it's not lighting or reflecting anything you're actually looking at. Right? Like, I mean, of course, that's a bit of an idealistic circumstance for him because you can tell because we don't live in a vacuum of nothing. But, you could imagine the circumstance, and it's not that obvious where you couldn't imagine it, So it's just sort of one of those things. It exists there and it's traversing, but you don't see it.
Well, yeah, that's kind of how space works, though, isn't it? You don't see it at all, and then all of a sudden you come into contact with something, and then that reflection from it is what you're seeing.
Right. So it's source of emission that you'd be able to observe, and the point of reflection or refraction.
Kind of makes you wonder if the dark is really the dark. Like, are we just seeing it wrong? And like, we look at a ball and we just see black, right? But we look in space, we see black, but it's also already has a reflection going on. So I guess you could drive yourself nuts thinking about that.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, hey, look, for what it's worth, and not that this is analogous, but remember that almost all life starts in the dark.
Yeah.
Almost. Not across the board all, but almost all life starts in the dark. So, I mean, light isn't a contingency of creation necessarily when dealing with matter, in an existing form. It only becomes something necessary for creation if matter is yet to manifest. I don't know how relevant that is, but I can't see the comments, so if you're putting them up and they're worth reading, read them out.
Oh, okay. Well, they're all talking about longitudinal waves and how they work and stuff like that.
Yep.
So yeah, they're pretty much right on. So
yeah,
let's see.
I didn't realize talking about how to collapse a longitudinal wave into its native self was a black subject of conversation until yesterday. But you know what? It makes sense. So scrub anything I ever said about that before. It's a lie.
Huh.
I'm far from nefarious.
It makes all the sense in the world when you start looking at transverse and longitudinal waves and you talk about your Tesla coil and which one's which. It's pretty much self-explanatory at this point, and you should be able to see it that way. You know what I mean? It's not hard to see why it creates it. It's hard to capture the right idea of it. Because the longitudinal wave it's not a spring necessarily. I mean, it starts out that's how you create it. You know what I mean? Just like in your Tesla coil, it's like a spring that goes out like this. I don't know that it's retracting as much as you think it is. And the field that it builds out is like a scalar field in how much energy it goes out, right?
Yep.
But it also goes through everything like a gas. So it starts penetrating everything in the room and goes right through it. So that's why Tesla had a hard time saying what energy was in the end, because you have all these conflicting understandings of each part of energy.
Well, right. There's different parts is the whole point. Different types. Or different manifestations, realistically, if depending on all the things that we've talked about 1,000 times. Now, as like I just said, I take it back, and I was lying about collapse of transverse waves and such. But realistically, to understand that, all you really got to understand is how tuning forks work in sympathetic resonance. That's exactly what it is. Is what's a still tuning fork other than the potential to make a sound, right? But when you whack something in resonance and it picks up on it, all of a sudden it's screaming too. How come? Well, because it's picking up on that resonant frequency and collapsing into a state of resonance. And that's it.
I was going to say, you also have to have sound propagation with resonance. Just so we're all aware of this. Try taking the same tuning fork, strike it next to each other. Depending on the distance of it, it doesn't ring. You see, so that little box that they put it in, don't fool yourself. You have to have sound in order to move it. So sound is movement. And you resonate in sound. You're now moving that sound to an object. I mean, think of the walls of Jericho. It literally took sound to move the resonance in order to break those walls. So it's interesting when you break it down that you would have to see it that way.
Yeah. I mean, realistically, you got to remember that the enemy of all of the transmissions of these types of frequencies is going to be dampering of sorts. Like you want things to be as free and isolated onto themselves as possible in order to achieve the purest capability of emission and retrieval of any frequency wave because of resonant dampening. So it's the same thing with the tuning fork, right? You put the tuning fork in the box where it's like it fits in nestled into like foam and stuff, and it's dampened, and that separates its locality, right, from the locality of where the emission of a second tuning fork is, and therefore that one would be dampered and not throw off the pitch because it's been impeded. Okay, and mind that word, impeded. It's no difference than the impedance that's suffered through hysteresis, and similar when you have losses due to basically heat in that case, but in this case dampening. It's that's the analogous.
Gotcha. Sorry, I'm reading the comments, Joe.
Yeah, no, okay.
Got a disturber out there.
I didn't put it up on my computer today, so it's like this big on my phone, and it's like I'm the best.
I don't mind that somebody disagrees with us so much as comment like talking to the leader, buddy. You're in the wrong place, man. If you I'm not affiliated with anybody else except for the guys that you see on the screen when they come up on the shows. So good luck with that. You know what I mean? But whatever. You know what I mean? Put him in timeout, let him do his thing. I don't need that. We're just trying to get out some science ideas out here, throw them out there, and let people decide on their own. That's the way it works. And
listen, we're just a bunch of thinkers here, and thinkers and guys tinkering and doing stuff to try to prove it along the way. We're doing our small part as far as trying to get the science out there for people to understand in a meaningful and effective way. If you don't agree with it, it's guess what? Most physicists don't. So is it shocking that you don't? Like, you think we give a rat's ass? You're super fucking wrong, man. Super fucking wrong. And you're not wasting my time. You're wasting yours. Like, so, it is what it is. But with that said, and I said it the other day too, nobody here's a naysayer to an opinion or something that's different than what we're saying, but present it that way in a manner that we could address it and talk about it, because nobody here is all knowing, and what we're talking about is all like, even though it's been known for probably centuries and centuries, it's, as far as anybody here is concerned, this is at the cutting edge of what anybody can understand at this point on the topics that we're discussing. Mm-hmm. So, are we going to be right 100% of the time? Absolutely not. But I don't think that we present it that way either. So we just do our best.
Well, yeah, we present the ideas, then we test them, then we tell you the exact results. And not only that, you don't have to listen to the volume on any of it. You can just come up with however you think it's working. There's a lot of times I won't say anything on there and just let you figure it out. You know what I mean? I think that's the coolest thing on the channel. Then it's like, hey, you know what I mean? I got what I wanted out of the experiment, the part that I needed to see for my experiment. I think that's awesome. I love it when people come back and they go, oh man, I did that test and it worked out the same way you told me it would. You know what I mean? Or, hey, I got this added to it. You might want to try it. Those are the coolest times ever, man. That's what I like about building stuff.
Yeah. And honestly, not for anything, and I'm not comparing us to any other, podcasters really out there, but what I am saying is that what we're doing is separate and independent of everybody else entirely, like Nathan said. Okay. And yet we're reaching the same conclusions everybody else has, and sometimes before they've widely said a word, and I know I can't speak for anybody else, although I know that Nathan would fall into the same boat as me. I highly respect a lot of the people out there doing the same sort of work, and then all of the legitimate experts that they have access to that we do not. But I'll be real in saying, like, everything that has been said is only recent, even by these experts. Okay. And yet this is stuff that we've been talking about before these experts started doing these other casts. So, we didn't even have the resources necessarily to look to them, and obtain that information from them as a direct source, to confirm what our own findings and beliefs were. And even though, of course, we look outside our small bubble for information and inspiration, I know that all the conclusion, everything that I say on this show, for instance, is actually not only a correlation to the information that I've gained from the external, but it's stuff that I've actually thought about, meditated on, and figured myself. So, and that's not a pat on my own shoulder, but I mean, at the same time, to understand these things at such a fundamental level, like that's how it has to be, So, it's no disrespect. I'm just throwing it out there. I don't think I'm right 100% of the time, and if I'm right 10% of the time, I'm doing great.
I do want to say this, and I'll mention this. I watched Dave Rossi the other day, and I know Joe did too.
Yeah, no, it was great.
I could tell you this, where you must be hitting some point somewhere and doing something right if other people like him are picking up on the same things that we're picking up on. If we're starting to see the same things and start seeing the same physics work together, then I think we're on the right track. And, I hope more people get on that same track with us. So it was really cool to see that he understood there was a cold side of energy. He understood what it was. And he understood why it's important to have the longitudinal wave. He understood all of that and put it together in what I would say was an excellent conversation that he had and how it built out. So it would be something that we would definitely have on our channel as well. It sounded like a conversation we'd have here. So my hat's off to him. Great job.
Yeah, no, that was an excellent job. And, Jesse as well did a really good job. He always does. And for what it's worth, I mean, I had seen Dave Rossi a couple of times before. But I didn't follow him to the point where I knew really what his entire story was. But after hearing his story entirely, and a lot of people will be like, man, that just sounds really crazy, or whatever, how he came about this whole interest and how he was led down the path and stuff. I'll be honest with you, it's not all really that different than my experience and how I got involved in this stuff. And it's the same, my story really resonated with what his story was, and I didn't even know that. It's like me, I'm just a claims adjuster, for an insurance company, I have no business really knowing or thinking about any of this, but through my own meditative practices, through my own exploration and questioning, stuff started coming to me. And, there was definitely one experience that I personally had that was really visual and profound, that it wasn't like an alien, like he said, for me. For me, it was more just a visual understanding and like a peek behind the curtain, and from that point forward, I had an intuitive understanding of these things to a degree. But then what was interesting was that the universe, for me at least, provided a path to understand more and more, little bits of information that would just sort of become relevant. And it's oh, wow, that's what this is, and it makes it click. And he said that too, and how it comes in bits and pieces and in a guided fashion. It's exactly how it came to me. So when I heard his story, I was really hey, it's incredible how similar it is for some people. And I'm not the only one that I've even heard say these sorts of things too. Gerald has a similar story too. So, there's something more to it, and it has to do with that light body readiness. It does. It has to do with that light body readiness. It has to do with the spiritual endeavor. There's more to it than meets the eye, and it's more than we always discuss.
Yeah, I would say it's a belief in the Almighty, the big man upstairs. You know what I mean? But I can understand. I'm going to do a little trolling here on my own just to have some fun. Yeah, you might have seen a little blue man at the end of the bed, but it might have been this guy right here.
Nate, Nathan, were you beaming Rossi information?
Oh, oh, a little fun. Oh,
You fucking rascal, you.
oh, I can so solemnly swear there was no probing going on when I visited him that day.
Hold on. I promised somebody I would say something.
Go ahead.
The fuck?
Okay.
That's it. That was what
Oh,
I had a special request to say that. So there it goes.
sorry. I have to do a little bit of trolling, man. You got a little blue man at the end of your bed. Gotta give him some props. So,
Yeah, no, that was awesome. And then what a great presentation. He's a brilliant guy. And
absolutely.
Jesse always has a way of finding the right people to talk to also to effectively get this stuff out there. He's got a great show. I love how he put it together. And like I said, I think that interview would make me follow Dave Rossi maybe a little bit more closely than I had paid attention in the past, because it's very clear that a lot of our opinions on the workings of things align.
Absolutely. Yeah, I felt the same way.
Yep.
That was a really good interview. So,
Yeah,
we got to give props where props are due. You know what I mean?
absolutely. That was a good one. And Ashton's been up to it lately too, and I give him some credit where credit's due. And I appreciated his come to Jesus moment with the realization of maybe the potency of these things, and the gravity that it kind of holds, and because I always liked this show, but I'm glad he had that come to Jesus moment with that subject, at least, because it was like a little squeamish for me, being someone who talks about similar things. So,
well, I mean, consider this. I mean, we're talking about creating a time dilation field, and if you do it wrong, we're all screwed. Not just one of us, not just me, everybody. So, I mean, think about what we're getting into. We're talking about energy weapons and stuff like that with Tesla and directed energy. It's a lot, and it all comes from the same technology. And it's something that would be very bad in the wrong hands. So I think it's great that everybody watches the experiment, sees what goes on, and gets their own idea from it. I think that's absolutely amazing.
yeah, and I think that the audience too, although they probably know, I think it's worth saying that even I don't experiment. I think people widely know that, But as far as the discussions we have or amongst ourselves, or things that are doing, there is a certain amount of vetting of what we choose to discuss, here for clear purposes too. If you're smart and following the subject, yeah, okay, you could extrapolate it, but isn't that everything?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you could extrapolate it, but at the end of the day, there's certain things that we know amongst ourselves that we choose not to outwardly say, because frankly, there's certain things that you have to discover yourself, and that's just plain and simple about it. That's all, so worth noting.
By the way, I'll just put this up. So just so we all know, I do testing on my channel.
Mm-hmm.
I do it constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And I prove resonance. I have the field on my channel. You can clearly see I make the field. It's a whole thing here. I'm not bringing the stuff that I just pull out of my you-know-what. I'm testing the theory of different inventors to find out if they had it. And then I'm showing it to you. I literally show you my backyard lighting up with energy because I put it right in the water. I'm doing things that you normally wouldn't do. I can make mud conductive 3 feet away. I'm not reading it out of a PDF. I am actually doing the experiment for it. That's the thing. So if you want to play put up or shut up, buddy, I got it. You know what I mean? I got it in spades.
I mean, honestly, that to me is perplexing, because you go over and beyond to show this work, not only in stuff that you record and release, fine. I get how there could be skepticism there. Although, like, frankly, if you're skeptic, all of what's being done is right there in front of you, being told what is going on and how to build it yourself. Go
Oh, yeah.
confirm it yourself. Secondly, he does it on the lives too. And so there's in fact builders workshops and stuff like that. They're dedicated to these live presentations. So like, short of showing up at your doorstep and showing you the stuff physically with your own two eyes to let you electrocute yourself to death with it because you don't know what you're doing, I don't know what to tell you. Like, what are we supposed to say or do? Like, like, yeah, there's always going to be skeptics, and we're not butthurt by that. But like, like, again, come on, why are you watching every episode? It doesn't matter. I'm not even wasting my time on that stupid shit.
By the way, Jarvis, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Jarvis.
For those of you who don't know, Mr. Laney, this is Jarvis. So Jarvis is awesome. Yeah, you know what? That's kind of the whole thing, and hopefully it tells people, look, you can build it. I'm showing you how to do it. All I ask is that you keep it in perspective. You know what I mean? In whatever experiment you do, and don't try to make it into some weapon, because I'll stop doing the experiments at that point. But as long as we all understand that, I think it's pretty good.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, there'd be more engineering to be done to make any of this stuff that's presented, outwardly harmful.
Yeah.
So, like, you could fry yourself, but it's not gonna end the world.
I've shocked myself more times, Joe, than you'll ever know. I just walk by something and it'll shock me after a while, man. You work with this high voltage all the time. It's like a daily basis, 4 or 5 times a day, and you're trying to be careful and everything. It just happens. You just have to make sure the energy is low enough. And then when you get it to something that's high enough, you put it behind some kind of a wall or something, you know what I mean? Some plexiglass where you can't be near it. That, keep the safety precautions in there. So,
yep.
Anyway.
I'm this experiment that you're working up to right now, though, is the number one that I'm looking forward to, and I've said it a couple of times, and I mean that when I say it. I think that this is gonna, I think it's gonna be real interesting, and I think that the amount of variations that it, places that it could go is, I think it's tip the iceberg stuff. I think it's great.
Yeah, real quick, where's Gerald? Gerald's working hard right now, man. His wife was laid off and they started a business, so they're swamped. And trust me, I'm the first person that would love Gerald here to hang out with us and do things. So yeah, as soon as he gets all that squared away, man, I hope he comes back for good. So yeah, we all miss him. So yeah, by the way, the good thing about this is, man, with this experiment, because it's an STL, if you got a 3D printer, you're in the game. I mean, I'll show you how it's built. You could set it up with your own motors and everything, you know what I mean? The changes you want to make in it. You don't have to stick with mine. I'm just giving you the files, and then you can build it and try everything. And I encourage a lot of people to try it and tell me what you get out of it. You know what I mean? Some people have a bigger budget than I do, so sometimes they start out, with metal spears right away. You know what I mean? And I think that's absolutely fantastic. I'm going to love when everybody gets on there and they're able to mod the file and, change it. If anybody knows how to take a Fusion 360 file and place the building file on Thingiverse, let me know. Because that way you can open it and edit the actual file of it. And I've seen a couple of people that had them on there, and I'm unaware of how to do that. So if you do know, let me know, and I'll drop that file in Thingiverse for you with this. But like I said, the only reason I haven't dropped it yet is I didn't want to put it out before I knew it would hold together in some way. But as soon as I know that, man, you guys are good to go. I'll drop it for you, and you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, for sure. And if enough people are able to make their own variations of it and everything, I really feel that it would be worthy of having a little segment on whatever show during the week to show that work off. That way, your work is not going under the radar, your efforts aren't going, unfounded. And even if it's a failure, I mean, I know personally, I get more out of being wrong and realizing, what I did wrong than I do out of somebody just agreeing with me or something working. So even if it doesn't work out as expected, you should show the work, because that'll just prevent other people from going down those same paths. Or have a certain realization of something. Oh, okay, that happened here. You know what? This is another direction to avoid that. So failures are just as important as successes. We got to remember that. And I can't wait for that file to be available to people and to take advantage of that, as well.
Yeah, Dennis says here, save it as a 3MF file. So I'm going to try that.
Cool.
So thank you for that, because yeah, that's what I need to do for everybody. So, and then, don't you have videos of your experiment archive? Yeah, I've got, I think, over 300 videos now, and
videos, yeah.
sometimes I probably need to tighten up some of that, and do more of a overall video with all of it in it. That way, people understand it better. But if you ever wanted to build a Tesla coil, man, I tell you exactly how to do it on my channel, and you can make an awesome one. 13-inch sparks if you want to run AC. If you want to run DC, we can run secondary Tesla coils with absolutely no primary on them, man, and it just rocks. So, yeah, we do the experiments, man. That's what makes it cool. I love it when somebody comes back and go, man, I built my first Tesla coil. I mean, watching your channel, that's really awesome. Like, I used the crappiest spinning machine ever. Like, I literally took scrap wood, Joe, and I screwed it to the table, and it's literally a rod from like an old drill bit or something that I shoved through there, and I put caps on it, and I spin it by hand with my hand like this, and I spin the sucker, and I have to watch it with my old lady's glasses on my nose, right?
Yeah.
I look like Grandfather Time as I'm fucking spinning this thing, dude. It's hilarious to look at. But
hey, listen, when you get nice 2.75 magnification going on and it's in perfect focus, it makes all the difference. So you might look like, some kind of weird old shoemaking grandpa like Geppetto or something, but at the end of the day, like,
dude, it's hilarious to watch. Like, I put it in fast forward and it makes it even better. Because you're not talking or anything. You just see yourself taking a break because your hands are all cramped and all screwed up. And then, real fast. Oh, it's great. It's just fun to watch, I guess.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Old man thing. Right on, everybody. It's been about 2 hours, man. I think we're close to the end. Joe, you got anything?
No, nothing all that exciting going on over here. It's still cold, still snowing. Like, they're never right with the weather here, which is frustrating as could be. Is like, not that I go out and do all too much, but like I'm looking forward to. And they said the other day, like, oh, it may snow like a quarter of an inch or something like that. And then I woke up and it was 6 inches of snow, and I was like, oh yeah, that was close. And then it was supposed to snow like 6 inches today. It didn't snow at all. I have no idea what's going on at any given time. So for now, the casts are good. We keep the topics coming. Of course, if anybody has a particular related subject that you'd like us to touch on, that you'd like to hear our 2 cents on, always invite you to put that in the comments or the chat. Frankly, for what it's worth, if you comment on the video after the live is ended, it stays there and there's less of them to have to weed through. So if you do have a suggestion, leave the comment on the video, and that way we can look at it. Trust me, we don't struggle for topics, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we're addressing, what the community wants to hear about too, and not go over the same crap over and over again either. So, please, by all means, your input is appreciated.
I want to say thank you to the members that joined today. Man in the Box, Cracks, Cherise, and I don't know that I'm saying that wrong. So if I did, I'm sorry. And I want to say thank you to Mr. Lanius or Jarvis. I really do appreciate it.
Yep, and we just got 5 memberships gifted.
Oh man, right
Thank
on.
you so much.
Okay, hold on, Joe. We're gonna go a few more minutes if you don't mind, and I'm gonna
Please,
pass
go.
these out.
I'm good. This is a baby episode compared to some, so trust me, we're good.
Okay, hold on. I may not be able to do it just yet. I'm looking at it, trying to find it. I think it's going to do it automatically, Joe.
Yeah, sometimes it does. I remember that from last time, right?
Yeah.
Ben was on when we did it last time, so he explained it because he understands it. I don't know anything about this, but
Well,
yeah,
Miles,
I think
thank
it
you
does
very
it.
much. That was totally awesome of you to
That's
do,
amazing.
brother.
Thank you.
So I'll find out here. You know what? Give me a second. I'll look it up real quick, Joe. Yeah, we got more members here.
Nice. Awesome. So who are our new members? Does it tell you?
Yeah, give me 1 second. It tells you on the amount of days, so I will just do a. Sorry, guys, just give me a second.
So how about the gutting of the United States government? I love that. Cut open the belly of the beast and spill.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. That's just all kind of crazy.
Yep.
All right, there you go. Those are our new members right there.
Very cool.
So
I
right
can't
on, guys.
see else I'd read them out, but thank you, Miles. Much appreciated, brother.
Right on, man. Thank you. Dude, that's so cool. So now, by the way, guys, just so you know, when you go in the chat, you can use all the emojis that we have here. And I'm sure we unlocked another one. So we had one suggestion about nuts earlier for the emojis. Anybody else got something on their mind that they want? I mean, we have a pair of big fireballs on
I
there.
was going to say, we kind of already have the fireballs, I don't know. You could put your vagina rock up there.
Oh, my God, dude. Not with that again. It looked like fields building out. It didn't look like what you were looking at. You just got things on your mind.
Like I said, I mean, it wasn't a pretty one, but I mean, it resembled it.
So, it says UFO, the Admiral. Oh, Admiral Jack.
Yo, Jack would be a funny one.
Oh, yeah. And I should probably just label it Schmucks.
Smucks. SMUKS.
Oh, okay. Admiral Jack it is.
I love it. Perfect.
I'm just going to label it Schmuck so everybody knows, so we can all put it up and have some fun.
That is perfect. Yo, make sure that you get that one face from like the Star Wars episode. Remember the one like
Oh. No.
If he catches wind of that.
That Star Wars episode was epic.
Dude,
it was his own words, man. It wasn't mine. I didn't rewrite the script.
There was no modification there. No, not at all.
No, he just calls everybody schmucks, dude, which is absolutely hilarious. As a matter of fact,
his tiredness bringing up Mud Fossil University. Man, I love watching that guy, but half the time I don't like. I'm sitting there like, like. Listen, I'm a pretty woo character, but like he take woo to the next level. He's like, you see the dragon? And then he's zooming out on Google Earth, and the thing is like the entire north of Africa. I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, there's only so much shit I could believe, but like then he says things that make sense sometimes. But he had a massive vagina rock too. It was more like a vagina cave. Huge, massive, absolutely massive.
Oh my God, dude.
You could fit a tractor trailer full of hot
I
dogs
think you
through
need
it.
to stop, bro. You're going way off the rails now.
Well, you know it happens. It is late in the episode.
All right, for all the new members, I'm going to initiate you here, and we're going to play Admiral Jack for you. Oh, man, I'm in so much trouble. Crew, this is your captain speaking. Can I please have everybody assemble at the view screen? Admiral Jack would like to address everybody at once. Admiral Jack, would you like to address everybody?
All these wannabe schmucks, they have a keyboard and they can get on the internet, so that suddenly they're experts.
Did he just call us all schmucks?
Schmuck.
Schmuck.
You're not a schmuck.
I was microdosing mushrooms that day. Not today. That day I was.
Barney.
Admiral Jack, we tried to get our transporters
Oh.
fixed. We reached out to the physics community for help. What do you think about it?
I think they're idiots. I think that when it comes to physics, okay, they don't know what the fuck they're talking about. And anybody who pays any attention to them, gives them any credibility, is stupider than they are. That's what I think.
Man, those people in physics sure didn't rub Jack the right way.
Given the chance, Jack will rub your grandma in the right way.
Oh, no.
Don't you worry about that.
He'll rub your grandma the right way.
Oh yeah, I agree. I totally agree.
It's all bullshit. It's all bullshit, okay?
Admiral Jack, maybe you can help us out with another thing. Joe tried to cook his hot dogs in the warp drive, and he screwed up something with the mass.
And he's made some very elementary mistakes. He violates Einstein's equation equals mc squared. He doesn't know the difference between the mass and the gravitational field, that the weight of an object is W equals mg.
You all heard the Admiral. Let's get this toroid out and let's get everything fixed.
Well, just an example, the inside of the toroid, that's about 3-inch diameter, 3.5-inch diameter.
Was I right to say it's about 6 inches in diameter altogether?
Yeah, maybe a touch bigger. Yeah.
It's an awfully big hole, Mike.
Don't go there.
It's Canadian. There's 3 holes.
All right. So you're gonna hook it up, and then we're gonna
Oh,
throw hot dogs through it like a carnival did.
Fucking Mike.
Oh my God, I'm choking. You.
This is what happens when you have me on. Don't we already know this?
Yeah.
At least Gerald ain't drawing the circuit for it.
Oh my God, we sound like a bunch of schmucks.
Schmuck.
Schmuck.
You're not a schmuck.
Don't tell me about what other schmucks say. Only I'm the big schmuck here, okay?
Oh, dude, that was amazing.
For posterity. I love it.
Oh, gotta love Jack.
Oh man. Definitely emoji worthy.
All right, guys, there we go. Schmucks, Jack emoji, Admiral Jack emoji, sorry. Gotta be the Admiral. All right, guys. Have a great day, man. I want to thank everybody in the chat. You guys have been totally awesome today. Appreciate it. Thank you, Joe, for doing this with me.
As always.
Right on, guys. Thank you to the new members, and thank you again, Miles, for getting us 5 more members on top of that. Guys, I hope you guys like it, and have a great day. Thank you.
Peace and love.